Another Marvel comic book summer movie, and this one about what happened in Natasha'S Budapest, that city from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The real Budapest, however, is far more interesting than the fictional one. So here are 5 quick facts that you may not hear from the entertainment media. Number 1, Budapest is not an imaginary movie set. It's a real city. Marvel Studios and their crew have arranged to shoot several scenes there, and they spent a lot of time there. This really has been a long time in the making, this film. In the film, when you see the city of Budapest, you'll see the aesthetic character of both East and West, because Budapest has been the world's most geopolitically important city since the 12th century AD. Budapest is today surrounded by 7 nations, and it's still on the big trade routes between East and West, routes of great economic and military interest to the world's most belligerent powers, China and Russia and Turkey and Germany, which means that the leaders of Budapest over the centuries developed into some of the most accomplished in diplomacy and some of the most shrewd when it comes to protecting their people from invasion. They learned an awful lot the hard way. Today, Budapest must deal with, still today, they have to contend with chaos and threats. They have to deal with agitators coming through, trying to break through their nation and go from point A to point B. They have to deal with human smugglers who are flooding Europe with criminal sex trafficking, drug gangs, jihadist cartels. China has a direct interest in a modernized silk superhighway running right through Budapest, both in information and trade goods. And so Hungary is a pressure point. You'll see if you're looking at the news. In the rising tensions between Russia and NATO, Russia and the Ukraine, Russia and her energy customers. And yet the current government in Budapest is doing the near impossible, managing peaceful relations with them, with Russia, but also with NATO and the Ukraine and the EU and the United Nations and Turkey and Israel and China and even the hostile Biden administration, and they're doing all of this simultaneously. Number 2, the people of Budapest know more about real war than anyone. On many occasions in history, they have defended their city to the death. And when they lost, which they did on several occasions, they suffered occupation by the world's most fierce enemies, including genocidal Mongols, Islamic slave traders. In the year 1526, Muslim jihadists subjugated Budapest, and then for the next 150 years, they took more than 1 million Hungarians into Africa as slaves, mostly women and children. But Hungarian families, they fought and resisted for a full 150 years, and finally the Hungarian families drove the invaders out and rebuilt the city into one of the most advanced and beautiful in the world at that time, in the 1700s and the 1800s. But then immediately they were caught up in another war, in World War I, and then occupation by the Nazis at the beginning of World War II, and then after World War II, then occupation by the Soviets, and then European socialists, and finally today globalists are at the gates of the city. Now back in 1956, when the people of Budapest were still occupied by the Soviet communists, they attempted to deliver their city from the Soviet domination, and Time magazine was, the whole world was watching. Time magazine named the Hungarian freedom fighter the Man of the Year. But the attempt at freedom failed at that point, and one of the reasons was they were hoping and thinking and expecting the Americans to come to their assistance. And there had been some promises given through our State Department, but we failed to perform. We failed to follow through. And then when the USSR sent overpowering armored divisions into Budapest, it was all lost. They pillaged, they dominated, they raped the women, they terrorized the city, they looted the city. And the freedom fighters lost. Some 26,000 resistance civilians who had not been killed were then arrested. 200,000 citizens fled the nation. Now, you may not know that Elvis Presley used his singing appearances on Ed Sullivan right at that time to raise money and awareness for what was going on, to raise money for those refugees. And he was able to actually raise the equivalent of $53 million for them in today's money. Now, number 3, as recently as 2015, did you know the citizens of Budapest actually repelled another invasion? Responding to a call to jihad, 10,000 Sunni Muslims per day started pouring over Hungary's borders, headed to the Keleti train station. And the first mobs of young Muslim men who made it through outnumbered Hungarians 200 to 1 in the train station. Now look at these cars. Look at these train cars. These are the same ones you will see in the movie Black Widow. And when these invaders were there in the station, they were defying laws, threatening citizens, defacing Hungarian property, defacing railroad property, shouting war cries. And some of these were the Islamic State jihadists who ended up in Paris to plot that attack, do you remember, which killed, wounded, tortured, and sexually mutilated 498 Parisians. An ISIS smuggler at the time admitted that there were 4,000 other ISIS gunmen among the Muslim migrants in Europe heading through Europe, and there might have been even more terrorists moving north, but within 2 weeks, Prime Minister Orban acted very decisively. He erected a razor wire fence on his southern border with gates and guards and vetting and warnings to criminal migrants. And Orban said this: "We chose border defense instead of raising surrendering hands." Now today the Keleti train station has been all cleaned up and it's safe. And you'll see it in the scenes filmed with Scarlett Johansson. So look for it if you're going to see that movie. Number 4, the bravest man in the West happens to live right in Budapest. And this is Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He is the most vilified political leader in the world by the establishment media, but their repeated false and hateful attacks on him don't shake his rock-solid conviction. He remains determined to replace every remnant of leftist socialism and to rebuild his nation on her 1,000-year-old foundations of Christianity. Those are just 2 reasons the media really hates him. Now, it was in the year 1989 that Orban, still in his 20s, stood up publicly to the Soviet army right in Budapest, publicly demanding the withdrawal of the communists from his nation. And for this, Orban was, of course, detained and mistreated. But within 4 months, because of the uproar that Viktor Orban started in his country, the Soviets were fearful of another uprising. And the Soviet troops did begin a withdrawal. And then Viktor Orban found himself the leader of an experimental political party in a nation that was devastated and weak, and with only vague connections to Hungary's past foundations of freedom, because the Soviets had so successfully erased all the freedom from the kids in school. And Viktor Orban had been one of those kids in school, trained to be a communist. And he was a communist until he turned his back on it. Now, his small political party studied European history and politics and theology, and slowly a plan emerged for the ethical refurbishment and renewal of the nation. Orban and his team of statesmen gained a stable majority in 2010, quickly replacing the Stalinist constitution with a freedom-friendly constitution, which they call their fundamental law. Now, my last point here, number 5. The people of Budapest are the most grown-up adults on the planet. And why is that? Because of what they've been through so recently. They love freedom. They will never give it up again. They are not easily intimidated by fashionable political correctness because it was so forced on them so hard for decades by the socialist Soviet dictatorship. Hungarian dissidents at the time, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, risked their lives, and thousands paid with their lives, for simply challenging political correctness. They were arrested, they were shot, or they were sent to their deaths in the gulags, on slave trains like these, which are now rusting away in Budapest. Engines like this one may also have carried Jews to their deaths in Germany. And then when the regime changed, it simply painted over with a new livery of the new god. And after that, had been painted over, apparently by the Hungarian government in black, but you can see that the black paint is chipping off, revealing underneath the old Soviet star. What simple machinery it is which can silence thinking men. When engines like this pulled out of Budapest, the voices of Hungarian dissidents, upwards of 500,000, were silenced in the remote deeps of Soviet slave camps. And this is why Budapest citizens will have no more of dictatorial political thought and meaningless virtue signaling. Hungarians feel pity for Americans who are so easily oppressed and subjugated by the irrational woke virtue signaling of the political left. Hungarians will never accept Marxism, especially when it's dressed up as social justice. They know Marxism when they see it. They know irrational political manipulation when they see it. Just last month in Budapest, there was a big soccer match there, and an Irish soccer team, at the beginning of the match, did the little knee-bending dance while the Hungarian team refused to follow along. And thousands of Hungarians in the stadium booed the Irish for their weak surrender to political nonsense. And said Hungarian Darren Grimes, a commentator, he said, "Once again, the Hungarian fans are making their voices heard. Why are we adopting this knee-bending fad from America? It's time," he said, "to stop this divisive act propagated by a mad Marxist cult." Now, when Hungarian voters, this is a different story, when they were given a chance not long ago to vote on questions of forced immigration, whether the European Union could send illegal aliens into Hungary without permission of Hungarians and the Hungarian government, a full 98% of voters came out in this referendum. They sided with the Orban government and they voted no. And then here's another story. In a more recent vote, the Hungarian parliament went to war against pedophilia in a bill which passed with this massive margin, 157-1. And so today Hungary stands as the most confident and free and self-aware nation on the continent of Europe. Orban is a national hero. His Eurosceptic government has more popular backing than all opposition parties combined because of who he is, his integrity, his character, and how he's been leading the country so consistently. History may regard Orban as the most broadly influential political leader of the 21st century. And freedom parties from Austria to Sweden imitate Orban's solutions and policies and really just his courage. And they respect him as one of the West's most inspirational and visionary statesmen. So when you see Budapest in the movies, remember reality. Remember the 1,000 years of real-world conflict that went on in this city when you see it. And please tell me if you want more information about the real Budapest. You can write to me at questions@geoffreybotkin.com and share this with your friends who live in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's a more interesting world out there. Let's explore it together. Thank you.